It's a pleasure to share with you the experience that I had at the JALT, or Japanese Association for Language Teaching International Conference, Shizuoka. The plan for today is to first give you a few comments on the conference itself, then to say a few words about my own presentation at the conference, and then maybe give you a few ideas on whether this type of conference would be something interesting for you. So let me begin with comments on the conference itself. The theme of the conference was opportunity, diversity, and excellence. This is a series that has a focus on language education in the Japanese context throughout all levels of the educational spectrum, from kindergarten to advanced college education. But in reality, there is a lot of emphasis on educational practices in general, not specifically for language, even if language remains the main focus. We had four plenary speakers, four plenary lectures. And as you can see, we have five portraits here, because for the first time I attended a double plenary lecture. So you can see that the top left and the center top photographs have the same background. So there was a joint plenary speech. And you can see that there's a variety of types of invited speakers. The two that I just mentioned, so Andy Curtis and Li Yincheng, they are very established researchers in the fields of language education. On the other hand, Hei Matsui is a like a recent PhD holder, and she's working more on diversity and inclusion in education in general. Kubota Sensei also gave a presentation in another event recently at Todai, and she's working on issues of language justice. And on the other hand, Janina Tabbi is the founder of a bilingual school, especially for younger children. So basically, there's a representation of language education, of justice in education in general terms, and in entrepreneurship related to education in general. Specifically, a bilingual school, yes, but it's also, generally speaking, an educational enterprise, let's say. So the conference took place in this very large and interestingly looking building that you see in the right here. The grand ship, and I show this a picture because you can see that this building had something like 12 floors, and all of them were used during the conference. There was a large number of participants, more than 1,000, and at times there were even 25 parallel sessions. So basically, this is maybe the first thing that I want to say about the conference. It's quite difficult to carve a path into the kind of presentations that you might want to attend. Because basically there's a lot happening at the same time. So you really have to look at the program in advance to make sure that you make the most out of it. We also had other representatives of Todai presenting there. You can see Terashima Sensei here. You can see giving their own presentations, and there were a couple of other members presenting as well. Talking about the topics of the presentation, I collected a few titles that I thought might be interesting for you to get a flavor of the kind of things that were discussed at the conference. I won't be reading all of these titles. You can take a screenshot at the end if you want to look at them closely. But basically, in terms of areas and in terms of topics, you had specialized tutorials on teaching tools, and by tools I mean either in terms of technology or in terms of conceptual and interactional tools. You had also more conceptual or philosophical accounts of education. So, for example, classroom teaching as an embodiment of complex systems. As I said, one of the main topics of the conference was diversity. So, there was basically um, perhaps the easiest way to move beyond the focus on language education and think about education in general in the conference, growth and well-being of students and teachers. So as you can see from the titles, this is very much not exclusively language education oriented. And then also the creation or optimization of teaching programs, both in terms of individual courses and in terms of larger curricular development. Right. So this gives you a little bit of an overview on the type of things that you could have found at the conference. Now, I wanted to spend the next few minutes talking about specifically what I presented there, because I think that this is a kind of topic that might be interesting for other people involved, especially in the language education part of the program. So just to balance things out, my presentation was on phonetic, lexical, and interactional cues to proficiency. And basically, there's different ways of understanding what it means to be able. So essentially, this was a presentation on how can we measure proficiency in a second language. And given my background, which is research on linguistics, this quickly became an exploration of what it means to be proficient in a language in the first place. And then in turn, this becomes the question of what is language in the first place. So essentially, as you can see, the relevance of this topic to general education is essentially an understanding of the matter that we're trying to evaluate before we work on the ways on evaluating that specific subject matter. So in this reduction from the problem of how to assess a specific construct with respect to what is the underlying conceptual foundation of the things that we're trying to assess, basically the problem becomes how do we see language in the first place? And so, if we go throughout the literature, especially in the 20th century, we might see that there's three main ways of understanding language. There's a structural understanding, basically, language as a structure, as a code, as something which is made by units and the rules that govern the connection of these units. And this type of understanding brings about a specific way of testing language understood as knowledge of a structural system. Language can be seen as a cognitive ability, as a specialized aspect of a general cognitive faculty for functioning of the brain and optimization of input and output management, for example. And this tradition of understanding language as a specialization of the general cognitive system also can be derived into its specialized way of testing what language competence is under the assumption that language is a specialization of the cognitive system. And we can say the same for the communicative approaches, right? Language as a tool for communication, language as a tool for coordinating interaction between individuals. This generates completely different ways of testing what language proficiency is. So, for example, if we are looking at the way of testing language as a structure, we might want to see how students are pronouncing a second language, the growth of their lexicon, the ability to string together sentences in a more complex way. If we're looking at the cognitive aspects, we might focus on complexity, accuracy. The communicative aspects, we might focus on the strategic, interactional competence or the appropriateness of what they say. So each of these dimensions can be further problematized. So, for example, if we decide to look at the lexicon, we can look at lexical types or collocation, so multiple lexical units next to each other. If we look at types, lexical types, we can look at the count, at the sophistication of these counts, at the frequency, the age of acquisition, and so on and so forth. And some of the presentations that we had at the conference by colleagues from Todai bore on these specific topics, right? So what I tried to do in my presentation was to triangulate three different concepts that come from three different schools of understanding what language is to provide an educational approach on how to assess this complex topic in a more robust way. So basically, this is an approach that's known as triangulation in a variety of sciences, or specifically for people who come from linguistics and social linguistics, specifically as convergence, right? So I guess that now you can see the sense of the title of the presentation, which is phonetics, lexical, and interactional cues to proficiency. These three different domains of understanding that converge into the assessment of proficiency. So just to give you a quick example of what I was aiming towards, I can play you an extract of the video recordings that I was using as material for my research. And you can maybe just compare these two different levels of proficiency as embodied by these two students.
What do you usually do to develop your speaking ability?
I often watch American TV drama to be used to listen to English, or and I like to watch YouTube English channel to to develop my English skill.
Okay,
This
I
is
understand.
Right, so this just gives you a brief example of the kind of material that I was working with. This comes from a corpus of learners of English from a variety of places in Southeast Asia. It's a very large and interesting corpus that could be used for many types of interesting research projects. And I focused on the most extreme students, the 12 speakers, the most extreme one, the six with the lowest proficiency and highest proficiency as evaluated with an independent scale. And so basically I analyze these three different cues to proficiency coming from three very different traditions. Lexical types from the structural point of view, basically counting the type of different words that students are using in these interviews. Speech rate without hesitation, so pruned speech rate to give a measure of the cognitive ease with which students can react to the demands of this task. And then I developed this new metric of interactional passivity for the communicative side of things. So this is mainly the new contribution, the specific type of things that I'm working on, to basically quantify how willing to participate in the interaction the student is, as opposed to whether the interviewer has to prod the student with many questions in order to try and get some information, right? And so I plotted here on the horizontal axis the speech rate values for these 12 speakers. And as you can see, there's already a little bit of separation between the two groups. So the question is, are the students with a lower speech rate who are speaking slower, the ones with lower proficiency? And so I also cross this information with lexical types, here color-coded. So if the students who have a lower speech rate are also the ones who have fewer lexical types, we would expect orange to be to the right and blue to be to the left. And to some extent, this is what we see. And also I plotted the interactional metric on the y-axis, basically more passivity, basically needing the interviewer to be more active in order for the conversation to flow nicely. This would be high scores, and low passivity, meaning higher agency from the part of the student, meaning that the student volunteers information, as in the case that you have seen before in the video. There would be lower values on the scale, so we would expect blue to be higher and orange to be lower. And basically, this is what we find for this little sample. Of course, we can cross this with the TOEIC, with the official kind of standardized test the students can take, and we can see whether the TOEIC is high or low. So we would expect high TOEIC scores, standardized tests of proficiency in English for the students who are in orange and to the right and to the bottom. And to some extent, this is the case. Not completely, though, because TOEIC is a standardized test that's basically tracking reading skills, and students can learn how to perform well on these tests even without being good communicators who can speak fluently and in an effective way. So I would say that this is really opening, let's say, a gap between our understanding of proficiency coming from the linguistics tradition, which is considering this different aspect of the construct of a language, as opposed to what we can see from the type of standardized tests that we sometimes, most often actually in the Japanese context, used to decide whether students can access one type of course or the other, or one type of university or the other. So this is problematizing the kind of test instrument that we use to assess students' competence, actual competence in language use, but this can arguably be applied to other domains. So very quickly to conclude on the type of work that I have presented there, just a couple more slides to show that I tried to expand this pilot work from 12 subjects onto the entire 100 subjects corpus of the interviews. And I could do this since I was just finishing my work at the University of Cologne, where I had the pleasure of being able to hire some student assistants who could help me with this. So essentially, I used some sort of simplifications of the various metrics that I could use, and I asked the student to do the manual part of the annotation, and then I could work on the entire dataset of 100 students. And so again, if the entire dataset supports my view, you would expect blue to the top left and orange to the bottom right. And I would say that to some extent, with the usual type of variability that we encounter in messy data as speech data from students from various levels, I think that in general we might see this type of correlation between these three different metrics, four if we also consider the TOEIC scores. So this was an example of what I was working on for the conference. As you can see, language focused, but at the same time, construct versus concept versus test instrument type of oriented as well. So also more education based than specifically language only, right? So to conclude, I just had a few notes on whether JALT might be a type of conference that's interesting for people working in other domains and following this presentation. So I would say, should you attend, depending on your interests, you might see that basically, yeah, you would know fairly well in advance what kind of plenary speakers you might meet there. And plenary speakers are very accessible. They're very basically present throughout the conference. You can interact with them quite easily. And so one of these plenary speakers was a specialist in language testing. So I participated in this workshop that she was hosting on validity standards for classroom-based assessment. As you can see from the different aspects of assessment, this is very much not only language oriented. And so basically I had the pleasure to have a conversation with her, specifically on the topic of an idea that I wanted to pilot in my classes here at Todai, which is essentially, shall we say, a gamification of assessment using a sort of leaderboard, which has now become very prevalent now that we have apps for everything, for learning how to play music instrument, learning languages, and so on. So I found that many students find this type of gamified leaderboard-based assessment to be very exciting and motivating. And so I was asking her, since she has an experience in working in China and working in Canada, whether she thought that this was a good idea for the specific of this cultural context where public assessment in the form of a leaderboard could be seen as a threat to the face of the participants. And so basically we discussed on whether this was the type of thing that could be done individually, so with the name of the student, with the actual score, or whether it would have been nicer to organize things in a student within a team kind of individual and team-based kind of approach. And this is the kind of discussion that then I brought back to the meeting with my colleagues in my program at Todai in the ALES, ALESA, and FLOW program, so that we could discuss whether this is something that we can implement to keep the motivation high, to keep the accountability high, but without posing threat to the individual face of the various students. So there is something that can be definitely used, again, independent of the focus on language education, in general, using the experience of people that are very strong in testing in general from the educational point of view. Then two final points, sub-points that I wanted to mention with respect to the plans for future participation. Should we attend, basically in a more collaborative sense, attend not necessarily as Todai, but as a group of people coming from various departments within Todai? And for this, I wanted to show you briefly the kind of submissions that they accept at JALT from their website. You can find research-oriented presentations, like the one that I presented myself. You basically present your own research or collaborative research. You just apply for a slot, and then based on the validity of the research, they decide whether they will give you a 25 or a 60-minute slot, or of course there's all sorts of other scheduling constraints besides the content of the presentation itself. This is one type of thing that could be done. This is the one that I have organized, but you can also have a workshop, a practice-oriented workshop. And this can also be individual work or basically collaborative work. It's just more practical as opposed to the research-oriented work from before. But you can also have a forum with multiple presenters giving presentations on a similar topic, which can also be organized as a panel discussion. And basically, this is perhaps a type of contribution to the program of the conference, which can maybe represent an entire program or sub-program at an institution. For example, we could consider, if there was enough interest for this kind of activity, of having a showcase of the different type of active learning methodologies that we use in our specific program at Todai, organized as a panel discussion. I have to say that I have talked with some of the participants at the conference, and they've the ones I've met, maybe they were essentially being nice to me, knowing about my affiliation and where I'm working now. But I got feedback that the presentations that they saw from members of Todai were the ones that were, from the research point of view, most engaging and interesting to watch. So I think that our department has already a good presence there at Todai, with multiple presenters that received praise from the attendance. So it might make sense to try and fit them together and basically create a group that can present work together. I think that this could also be a good way to create more collaboration, also from the research point of view, between faculty members. We work a lot in the ALES program, for example, together as educators, and I'm having a great time working with my colleagues on educational matters. I can only imagine how nice it would be to also collaborate on research projects. And I will conclude with one final note, because I think that in this way the time, should be preserved. I will just say that JALT also offers research grants, and I've been very pleased with the grant program. I have applied. As you can see here, the timeline, I've applied in mid-October. And basically, by the beginning of November, I already knew the results of the application. And by actually early December, I have already received the funding as well that I can use for next year. It's small grants. We're only talking about, I don't know, 10 man. So it's nothing huge, but it's enough to maybe buy some equipment if you need a microphone, or if you have to hire student assistants, or if you want to remunerate participants. It can be essentially a lightweight kind of application. And if you are interested, by all means, do contact me. I'll be happy to share more information on the topic. And I would say that this concludes this part of today's discussion from my side. I look forward to your comments and questions.